Good evening. In the news tonight, Britain arrested 21 Libyans and said they would be expelled. Washington congratulated Europe on anti-Libyan moves. The government reported the biggest drop in inflation in 36 years. More detail on these stories in our news summary coming up. Jim?
After the news summary, we have a newsmaker interview with the French ambassador to the United Nations. Then, in our War on Drugs series, we examine the police effort to rid the streets of pushers with a report from New York City and a discussion with police officials in Los Angeles, Minneapolis, and Houston. And finally tonight, essayist A.C. Green celebrates 150 years of Texas.
Funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T. Whether it's telephones, information systems, long-distance services, or computers, AT&T. Funding also is provided by this station and other public television stations, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
British police arrested 21 Libyans today and said they would be expelled on national security grounds. Most of the Libyans are students. One was said to be a pilot who had threatened to form an anti-American suicide squad. All 21 were picked up in early morning raids in various parts of the country. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher told Parliament her government is considering further actions against Libya, but she rejected the idea of economic sanctions. Jim?
The United States welcomed the British action. White House spokesman Larry Speakes also had good things to say about the European community's decision yesterday to restrict the number and movement of Libyan diplomats. But Speakes said the U.S. still wanted the Europeans to do more. Today, one of the 12 nations voting action backed off. The Greek foreign minister said his country still had strong reservations about yesterday's sanctions and had not decided whether to enforce them. That drew this reaction from Deputy Secretary of State John Whitehead, who was testifying before a House Committee on Terrorism.
Our friends in Greece, for example, have yet to recognize publicly that Gaddafi and Libya are involved in terrorist activities. And so with them, we have quite a long way to go.
Well, let me ask you this. Have they been shown the information that the President has indicated he has in his possession and rejected it out of hand?
Yes, they have.
Whitehead also told the Congressional Committee the Reagan administration would not try to expel individual Libyans from the United States.
There are a number of Libyans living in the United States with visas. Mostly they are students. We have considered whether we should send them back home to Libya, and so far have decided not to do that. There will be a future for Libya after Gaddafi, and to have a number of educated Libyans who have been exposed to education in the United States and who have learned while here something of our values may in the long run hopefully lead to a more stable Libya and a Libya that will be more part of the world community than it is today.
Libya continued to deny involvement in any of the recent terrorist acts. Today specifically, a Libyan embassy statement in Rome denied the Italian charge against a former Libyan diplomat. The Italians claim the man conspired last year to assassinate the U.S. ambassador and 2 other ambassadors to Italy. The Libyan statement called the charges pure invention by the United States. In Washington today, 75 members of the House of Representatives sent a letter to French President François Mitterrand condemning the French refusal to allow U.S. planes to fly over France on their way to Libya last week.
Moscow called on the United States to work to repair the damage to U.S.-Soviet relations following the bombing of Libya. In a Kremlin speech, Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze described the bombing as a barbaric act of terrorism. He also maintained that up to 6 American planes were downed. Washington says only 1 was lost. In Libya, the wife of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi made an appearance before the Western press. We have a report from Brent Sadler of Worldwide Television News.
The first public appearance by any member of the Gaddafi household came when the leader's wife, Safia, and 2 of her injured boys showed up for a news conference. Uncharacteristically, she used the occasion to publicly condemn the Americans and British, and there was a warning for the pilot who bombed her home.
After what happened to me, if I get the pilot for that airplane, I will kill him myself.
Colonel Gaddafi was interviewed on Libyan television, apparently in Tripoli. He denied that his country exports terrorism and vowed to continue to struggle against what he called imperialism. However, his government has begun to assure foreigners that they will be safe if they remain in Libya. West Germany confirmed that a Palestinian arrested in the bombing of a West Berlin discotheque is the brother of the man accused in Britain of trying to bomb an El Al airliner. The suspect in the Berlin bombing, Ahmed Hasi, was identified as the brother of Neza Hindawi, who appeared in a London court today. He was charged with trying to blow up the airliner and murder his pregnant Irish girlfriend, who was arrested carrying a bomb. In New York, 17 men were charged today with plotting to sell more than $2 billion worth of weapons to Iran. Officials said the suspects included citizens of the U.S., Israel, Britain, France, and West Germany. It was described as the biggest arms ring ever caught in the United States. One of them was said to be a former Israeli general. They were accused of trying to sell American warplanes, missiles, and tanks to Iran.
The U.S. fired off another nuclear test in Nevada today. It came at dawn at the desert site 104 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Officials said the underground explosion was equivalent to 150,000 tons of TNT, or 12 times that of the Hiroshima blast in World War II. The Soviets quickly condemned the U.S. test, claiming it was damaging to the cause of nuclear arms control. The condemnation came in a statement from the Soviet news agency TASS.
The President of Austria said today that he could not decide whether former United Nations Secretary General Kurt Waldheim was guilty or innocent of Nazi war crimes. President Rudolf Kirchschläger made a televised address to the Austrian nation after reviewing documents from the World Jewish Congress and the UN War Crimes Commission. Charges against Waldheim have been raised during his campaign to become president of Austria. The current president said the documents appear to implicate Waldheim, but he would not present such evidence to a court of law.
And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to an interview with the French ambassador to the United Nations, a look at the police effort to stop the drug pushers, and a few words about Texas.
We focus first tonight on France and its diplomatic maneuvering on the U.S. raid against Libya. Yesterday, in the United Nations Security Council, the French government joined the U.S. and Britain in vetoing a resolution that condemned the U.S. for the Libyan raid. But that gesture of French support has done little to lessen the American anger at France for refusing to let U.S. bombers overfly it last week to raid Libya. That meant U.S. F-111 bombers had to fly around the coast of Europe, adding 2,400 nautical miles to the mission. As we reported earlier, today 75 congressmen signed a letter to French President Mitterrand criticizing his government's decision, a criticism being voiced openly in the halls of Congress.
Oh, I am very, very much disappointed in Spain and very much disappointed in France. We've been an ally from World War I. Ever since we've been a power, we've been bailing the nations of the world out, and to make our planes go an extra 1,200 miles is unconscionable, in my opinion.
I think we've seen our European friends blinded by greed and cowardice. It seems the French, for example, are far more interested in pursuing the franc or the lira or the dollar than they are to putting an end to international terrorism.
I rise to apologize for a French government that cowers by intimidation and in fear. And I apologize for that French government to those brave Americans who lie in Normandy and expected more, to those brave Americans who lost their lives in Dien Bien Phu and expected more, to those Americans who sacrificed to rebuild France and expected more. I apologize for all of those who expected more from a free and a proud French people.
Well, I'm mad, and I'd hope all Americans are mad about it, so let's do something about it. Therefore, I'd urge American tourists making plans to travel to Europe to boycott France and Spain, and to thank Margaret Thatcher by spending time and money in England instead.
Newspaper editorial writers condemned the French with equal heat, and so did television comedians like Johnny Carson, David Letterman, and Mark Russell on PBS.
Allons avant de la patrie, forget the glory that was France. First we saved your derrieres at the Argonne, then we drove the Nazis out of Normandy. Now you don't want our planes overhead unless they're bringing tourists with money. French wine with no regrets will pour down les toilettes. Croissants and brie, designs from Paris. Go sell them to Tripoli.
With us this evening is the French ambassador to the United Nations, CLAUDE de KEMOULARIA, who also serves as the current president of the UN Security Council. Mr. Ambassador, what's your reaction to France suddenly becoming the butt of American jokes like that and the target of so much criticism?
I will tell you, I was shocked, or to hear that song, or to see Mr. O'Neill or some other congressman have such a position, which shows that there is a complete incomprehension of the French position, and I think it should be explained. But I must say, then, when I think of my mother-in-law, who has hiding American pilots who fell on France during the war because their planes were shot down, and that she was arrested by the Germans and killed by them, she would be very surprised to hear the song I heard.
Well, things have taken...
Probably that she had the middle of freedom after her death. And I must say she would be very sad to hear that. But it shows that when it comes to France, the reaction in this country is very interesting. I'm an old-timer of this country. I must say, it's easy to say, but I love this country, as well as my wife and my family. Even my grandson. He's now in an American school here because we want him to be trained in this country as a young boy. So when I hear that, I think, what's happening? The Europeans, the majority of the British, disagree with Mrs. Thatcher's decision. The European Parliament voted by a small majority, but still a majority, its disagreement with the move of the Americans against Libya. In Italy, in Spain, everywhere you could see, in Germany, you could see manifestations in the street. None in France. Not one manifestation in France against the United States.
No, because the French opinion polls show that your countrymen are more or less evenly divided pro and con the U.S. action.
Absolutely. But it shows that immediately, as soon as it's the question of France, immediately there is a wave suddenly. Probably, I don't know, it's difficult to analyze.
Well, let's go to the specifics of it and the immediate cause of this wave in the last week of anti-French feeling. President Reagan yesterday said he could see no justification for your country refusing permission for U.S. bombers to fly over France. What is the justification in French view?
He sees that from the White House in Washington. We in France, the problem is not that we have any sympathy for terrorism. We suffer more than you from terrorism. We have been losing more people than you from terrorism. But we are closer to the danger. And terrorism is blind. This is basically the problem. We want to fight our own way, French way, European way, and we agree and we wish to collaborate with you. In fact, our special services are working hand in hand with your services. We were the first to expel Libyan diplomats outside of France. We have done it again, not to please you. We have not, listen to me, we have not voted with you and the British yesterday against the non-aligned resolution because of the reaction of the public opinion. We did it because we have an independent policy and because we know the danger, we want to fight the danger, but we have the right to fight it the way we think is the best and more efficient. This is our position.
Okay, understood. Now, President Reagan said he could see no justification for your refusal. Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, we just quoted him as saying he found it unconscionable, and other speakers had harsher things to say. What was the reason for France refusing the overflight?
Well, it was, I mean, the fact is that you should have asked my friend Ambassador Walters. In fact, he said recently that he did not really ask the French the permission because he thought, rightly, that this permission will not be given. Why? He came the very day that the move was taken. Too late to coordinate our action. May I tell you that the French government at that time said, we disagree with this precipitation, the way you want to act, but we agree to coordinate our efforts to fight against terrorism. And suddenly, the move is gone, and in a few hours' time, because the Secretary of Defense is showing a map on TV, showing that the planes left England, went all around France and Spain to Libya, suddenly people say, don't buy French wine, don't go to France. This is a little childish. May I tell you that very frankly?
Okay.
We deserve better.
Right. Now, I'm not clear. Did Walters or anyone else in the administration not specifically ask permission for the overflights? Were you never asked? Is that what you're saying?
If I quote Walters himself, he said publicly on TV here that he did not formally ask the permission because he knew that it will be refused. So the French government was not officially requested, nor did have to refuse the formal permission.
But it would have refused. It would have refused.
Yes.
Why?
That's right.
Why?
Why? Because we thought that this approach was probably not the most efficient approach to settle the problem with Libya.
Okay. Now, President Reagan also said yesterday that some European countries wanted a bigger, more decisive strike against France, and news reports against Libya. And news reports have said France was one of those. Is that right? Did France urge the United States to do what Weinberger quoted the French as saying, "Don't do a pinprick"?
This is new to me. I had no information about that. I've been reading the papers as carefully as you do, and that was completely news for me.
Your government has not told you that it urged the United States?
Absolutely. I never had any information of that kind.
All right. Now, in the New York Times, William Safire quoted you personally as saying that had the U.S. hit harder and more decisively, quote, you would have found us on your side. And just may I add, he said that 30 people at a dinner party in New York heard you say that.
Well, I mean, I respect Mr. Safire. He was not there. He was not attending that dinner. And maybe there were 30 people, but I was at the table of, I think it was 8 or 10 people. We discussed this matter, sure, in a private dinner. And I said I never comment any word or anything I say coming from a private dinner and from a newspaperman who is not even attending that dinner.
Well, did you say it?
No.
You did not say that?
Because obviously when you take out from what you say something, then the sense, the meaning is completely different.
But did you mean to convey the impression that had the U.S. acted more strongly and decisively and really knocked Gaddafi off, France would have applauded?
No.
You did not mean
I would have probably be ready to say that you go once and you leave. There is then an escalation. Who pays for the escalation? The Europeans, because we are closer to the danger. Then you go back. Then you leave. And then there is retaliation. And there is escalation. And who is paying for that? The Europeans. Let's see. If you had such a problem as we have near our coast, close to Western Europe, in the south part of your country, in Latin America, with a country or other countries or groups creating this terrorism action in this country, you don't have these terrorists happily in your country. Imagine that some of French people or European, German, Spanish were killed in it. If we were acting suddenly, attacking in the south part of this country, you would be surprised? Would you like it? At least you would have said to the French or the Europeans, you better first coordinate with us. Let's talk about it first. And that has not happened. But today, we have all agreed that we should talk about it in Tokyo. And this is what President Reagan said, and we have agreed
France supports that.
a long time ago. France supports the idea of discussing that at the summit in Tokyo in a few days.
What about the charge that one of the congressmen made in that clip that we showed, that France, he said, was blinded by greed and cowardice, meaning that your interest in your trade with Libya?
It's obviously that this congressman has no experience of what's going on in France. I have heard somebody else, whom I know very well, and I like him as a human being, Major Koch. Major Koch said here in New York a couple of days ago, he said it again 2 days ago, I think, he said, the French are greedy because they have their trade with Libya. First, I would like to say to Mayor Koch that he does not know that we have reduced by 75% our trade with Libya in the past 3 years. And I would like to add that still today, American oil companies are pumping oil in Libya, and I'm not asking you where the money goes.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us. Jim?